As previously trailed, we're going to be talking this week about the opportunities outside of studying at Oxbridge. But first of all, I think we should introduce ourselves properly.
Yep.
My name's Matt. I look after our research team here at UniAdmissions. And that essentially means that my job is to make sure that everything that we put forward in our programs, in our books, in our webinars even, is all based in data, is all backed up by the facts, and so that everything we suggest that you do to improve your chances of getting a place, getting an interview, all of those things are based on real research rather than just anecdote or opinion, which is great fun, even if it does lead to some, well, it just means spending a lot more time on Excel than any normal person would enjoy.
Having said that, though, I think there's going to be probably quite a lot of anecdote today in terms of sort of talking about our experiences, right?
Yes, and this is very much the fun side of Oxbridge, and so unfortunately, I can't, to a p-value of 0.05, guarantee that you will enjoy Korfball as much as the next person.
That's Matt. I'm Will. I'm the head of consulting here at Unimissions. So if any of you have spoken with us so far, you'll have spoken with me or one of my team. And what we do is we speak with students, get to know their applications, give advice, answer questions. And for students who want our support, we make recommendations for those that it's suitable for. So if you have spoken with me already, great to have you here again today. If you haven't and you'd like to have a chat, then we've got ways that you can get in touch.
So, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking this week about the opportunities outside of study at Oxbridge, both that we've experienced and that we've seen other people enjoy, as well as sort of putting those in a little bit of context. And then next week, we'll be talking about planning ahead for interviews. Interviews, I'm just trying to think, it's 6 months till Christmas this weekend. So realistically, it's probably 5 months until your interview. And this is a really good time to be thinking about developing those skills, working on your self-presentation, starting to get that practice in well in advance, so that all of those good habits for interview are really, really deeply rooted, rather than sort of getting into them at the last possible minute and then being, shallow rooted and ripped out by the first tough question of the interviewer.
Yeah, and remember, of course, these next 5-6 months, they are busy months, and most of you will be going into year 13, taking on the sort of new A-level material. You've got other things going on as well. So thinking about this early will always be a good thing, because you're going to be busy.
Yeah. So, as I said, we're going to be talking today about the opportunities there are at Oxbridge. I've split this down into 3 very broad categories. The first is to say what is different about Oxbridge compared with other universities. I've been to other universities, so I can speak a little bit about that based on my own experiences, as well as Cambridge. We'll then be talking, I haven't quite managed to alphabetize these, but in no particular order, we'll be talking about music and drama, which are the areas I was involved in at Cambridge, and the Debating Society, which I know Will knows a lot about. Student government, which I also worked in, sport, which Will was very good at and I was hopeless at, and going on to talk a little bit about internships and sort of the advantages that Oxford and Cambridge give you in terms of moving into the world of work after your studies. So to speak first about how Oxbridge is different from other universities, there's an old joke about this that says that a man goes to Oxford in want of either one of 3 things: a wife, a first, or a blue. I didn't get any of them, which is a source of enormous disappointment to me. But the idea here is that attending Oxford or Cambridge can be more than a degree. It isn't just a fantastic place to study, with great academics to work with fantastic libraries. There are also opportunities that exist far beyond that. And that's in part because of the enormous financial resources available to Oxbridge, which mean that the facilities are just of such a high level, but also because there are so many hundreds of years of tradition and things that have stuck around, and interesting institutions and clubs and societies to get involved in that are a level beyond anything you're going to find at another university.
Yeah.
So
And
to
naturally, you know, you're surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of creative, intelligent people. So there's always going to be exciting, interesting things going on, and always new ideas building on the stuff that's been long established.
exactly, you know, if you go to, as I did, King's College London, you can row at King's College London, but you can't row in the boat race. You know, you can do comedy or drama or theatre at King's College London, but you can't join the Cambridge Footlights. Um, all of these things, they exist in other universities to a greater or lesser extent, but the version of the available at Oxbridge is more often than not a whole other level of stuff. So I wanted to focus first on the sort of the three areas that you're going to be most familiar with from sort of normal life. These are the things that you might already be doing at school that you're passionately engaged in. So these are the kinds of things that I find come up most often on personal statements when I'm working on those. And I have to figure out whether we're going to keep it in or not. People love telling me about their grade 8 piano or violin. People love telling me about how much they enjoy doing being in the drama society or being the lead in the school play. And people absolutely love telling me that they're the captain of the football team. So these are areas that come up a lot. Now, I was quite heavily involved in music while I was at Cambridge. I'm not a musician myself, but I did various bits and pieces around it. And we're looking here at a picture of, I believe this is the Oxford University Orchestra in their own Oxford-based concert hall. And, you know, to the untrained eye, that may as well be the London Philharmonic, you know, a real professional orchestra. And the students who participate in this, mainly students who are studying music at Oxford, you know, these are people who are planning to go off into professional careers in music, who are, you know, winners of the BBC Young Musician of the Year, really high caliber people. And so if you're at Oxford, it's quite nice to go and see them because it's dead cheap and they're very good. So both Oxford and Cambridge, they have lots of orchestras. I believe Oxford has 3 orchestras. I think Cambridge only has 2. Most of the colleges will have their own orchestra, made up of both a mix of the music students and other engaged amateurs. They will all have a choir. I don't believe there's a single Oxbridge college that doesn't have a chapel that comes with a choir. And there will almost certainly be at your college a dedicated theatre or concert space that can be used for this stuff. And when we're thinking about colleges that are maybe only 300 or 400 students, all of a sudden that's a theatre space that you have access to that perhaps only 60, 70, 80 other people are really interested in. And that having that quality of facility available is really unmatched at other universities because there are going to be so many more people and so many fewer spaces.
Yeah, it's worth saying at this point, a theme that you'll notice along across all the different things is some of you who are thinking, well, I'm quite interested in music, but these fancy orchestras sound quite intimidating. There's actually so much participation across the high level, the medium level, and the complete beginner level that you really don't have to be a child prodigy to be able to enjoy music whilst you're at Oxford or Cambridge. You know, it goes from in my college, the choral scholars would spend sort of, I think, 4 or 5 of their days each week. They'd have a few hours singing, and to the point where actually they were paid an hourly rate for all the time that they were spending there. So that's at the sort of high commitment, high talent level, down to the sort of college bands, just groups of friends putting things together musically, the a cappella groups, which are all pretty good as well, actually. But there's a lot there in terms of being able to interact regardless of your level. And you'll see that with the other things we talk about.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to be good. You know, at the top end, there are, my college choir went on a tour of the States and then later a tour of Europe. So, you know, you don't have to just be a really high-end college choir that gets to go and tour Harvard. You can also be, like myself, a frankly incompetent footballer who plays left back extremely badly for the graduate team and gets subbed off early on because I'm that bad and unfortunate. So talking about drama, while I was at King's and then a little bit later at Cambridge, I used to do all of the lighting design for the plays that were put on. We've got a picture here of the theatre at Downing College. This is a 200-seat, carefully made classical proscenium arch theatre, and this is just one of, I believe, 35 odd plus the big theatre in Cambridge. You know, this is just one college, again, just a few hundred students, and they're getting access to the kinds of facilities that would be, you know, this is about as good as you would get in a small town, maybe even a decent sized city, depending on where you are. And that's just one small section of Oxford or Cambridge. So as I said, almost every college is going to have a theatre space. There will be lots of drama societies and comedy societies. There is huge enthusiasm for this sort of thing among students, in my experience. If you decide to go to Cambridge, you can join the Cambridge Footlights, which is pretty much the most famous student comedy society in the world, that gave us Monty Python and Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, plenty, Mitchell and Webb, and dozens beside that. And the range of actors who have been through Oxbridge is quite something. It's one of those funny things where you look up a British actor and you think, I wonder if what college they were at. You almost don't have to stop to see if they were at Oxford or Cambridge, because almost all of the time they were. I don't know, have you got any particularly good actors from your college? Well, I know we had Graham Chapman, Sebastian Faulks. I'm trying to think who else we had. I know Emma Watson was down the road at Pembroke.
So mine wasn't really, mine wasn't a college, so I went to Christchurch, and it was not really known for its creatives, but it is known for its prime ministers. So I think that's the heritage that we lean on. Well, I don't think we did have. Oh, actually, I say that Riz Ahmed, who quite recently got some Oscars, I think, was Christchurch. And again, you know, you wouldn't think, but lo and behold, he was at Oxford. You don't. It's just all of them somehow at some point spend their time at one of these universities.
Yes, it's more striking when you come across someone like Mark Gatiss and you realise they didn't go to Oxbridge at all, and you're sort of thrown off by it. Of course, he usually appears alongside Benedict Cumberbatch and Eddie Redmayne, who were both at Oxford.
Yeah.
So it really is a well-trodden path, that particular one. Speaking of prime ministers, as Will, I hope was an intentional link, because that was very, very. I think Will is going to tell us a little bit about the debating unions.
Yeah. So those of you sort of politically inclined, and of course this is definitely going to be those thinking of applying to PPE, there is a huge opportunity both at Oxford and Cambridge in terms of getting involved in your union. It's, you know, seen as pretty much a rite of passage for a lot of people who then want to go into government further down the line. Undeniably, it takes up a lot of time. It would be a big time commitment. At least in Oxford, the union president has to take a whole year out of their degree to be president. Do they do it the same in Cambridge, Matt?
I don't know, but I would not be surprised at all. That's how it works for the other student offices. So I wouldn't be shocked at all, because you are running what is in effect really quite an important international organisation.
Yeah. And you take out a whole year, and you're only president for one term, because you spend one term of that year preparing to be president, the other term being president, and then the last term preparing the next person to be president. So the people who do this are very committed, they're very hardworking, and they're running a really big operation. And again, you do have the option to interact with this as much or as little as you'd like. You don't have to be a member of the union, but I always would recommend that you do, because as you can see here, there's a huge roster of famous speakers who will be speaking there and will be debating there. Even just going as an observer is an amazing opportunity and experience, and not really one that you'll get that much once you're outside of university. But you can also start working your way up the ranks within your slate whilst you're at. So the slates are what they call, I suppose, the equivalent of political parties at the union. And you start relatively low down, maybe try and get your way up to treasurer or president or VP or something along those lines. And it is something which you'll see lots of people in politics have at some point gotten involved with something along these lines whilst they were at Oxford or Cambridge.
Yeah. As Will mentioned earlier, it's a favoured route for prime ministers. I took 5 minutes to look into this on the Oxford Union website, because I knew this at the back of my mind, but hadn't quite realised just how big a deal it was. So 5 prime ministers have also been officers of the Oxford Union, which is pretty impressive. And then I looked further into it, only to discover that there were even more people who had nearly become prime minister. who had been president of the Oxford Union, Michael Foote, Jeremy Thorpe, William Hague, Michael Heseltine, Michael Gove, Dennis Healy, and Roy Jenkins, and that's just since the 60s.
Yeah, I think for anyone, even if you're not interested in being a politician further down the line, the union is a fantastic thing. And again, it's not really something that you'll get as much at other universities. So it's certainly worth making the most of.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the, if you look at the present cabinet, it's, I think, more Oxbridge than anything else. And, there aren't, it's simply one of those things. You're just not going to get that anywhere else. There'll be debating clubs at other universities, but there really isn't anything at all that will compare with the Oxford or Cambridge Union. Speaking of other things that don't compare well, Will, talk to us a little bit about rowing.
Yeah, so rowing is something which inevitably most undergraduates will take up at some point, whether it's in your giddy first few weeks of freshers and in your first term, or in your second year, eventually you get roped in, or maybe even as you're trying to finish up your studies, for some reason you decide that waking up at 5 a.m. every day is a good plan. But it's quite a big thing, certainly at Oxford and Cambridge. Again, as with all sports, it's broken down into the collegiate level, and there's many boats going out on any given day. And even within colleges, there'll be 3, 4 different eights. So you can join this having rowed a lot previously, if you have, and do very well. Or you can join, as most people actually at Oxford and Cambridge do, having never rowed before. And then it becomes something which is quite a big part of your life and you enjoy quite a lot. And then, if you do particularly well, you'll end up on telly rowing against the other side. Now, even if you're not involved in the team, it's still a really fantastic spectator sport. There are a number of sort of rowing festivals which happen over the year, and usually there's quite a lot of the student body that go down to support, watch, enjoy the day, whilst the sports people are sort of slaving away, trying to get their boats to move as quickly as possible. We're all enjoying having drinks on a boat club rooftop. But really, again, it's something which you will engage with at some point, whether as a spectator or a player, and it's just part of it, really.
Yes, as Will says, it ranges from the seriousness of the boat race all the way down to the chaos of bumps. I managed to find this particularly good photo. It's not necessarily something you have to get involved in. It's something that you'll be encouraged to have a go at in the first term, but it is very much available at all levels of ability, including mine, which would be the lowest.
Did you row?
I did very briefly, and I was very bad at it. Okay. I think an emergent theme in the story of my attempts at sport, not my natural area. Yeah. So yes, as Will says, there are sports teams at every college, and they're going to be operating in almost every sport, including sports you've never heard of. Whether that's squash or korfball. And I think, as an American import, a lot of them have Quidditch still, or has that fallen out of favor?
No, there's still Quidditch. I mean, the sports that I got involved with early on, I did archery for a year. I'd never done that before. I did kendo for a few weeks. That's a sort of, that's a swords martial arts. So there's loads of different things going on. People often have only done sports at school. So they have done lacrosse, hockey, football, those kind of things. And then they go to university and they just do the same. Please do look out for those stalls with big banners saying words you've never heard of, because it could be that actually it's something which is very fun. And if you are someone who hasn't had such a sort of great experience of sports at school, but it's still something you want to get involved with, there are lots of sports which no one will have done before. Pretty much no one had really spent that much time doing kendo, but you could start it, learn it, and become very good at it in your 3-year time. It's also worth saying, so there's obviously the university level, but there's the college level. And like we said for the music, there's this huge range of ability to participate. You could, on a Saturday afternoon, very easily go from playing a hockey game for your college, then over to do some volleyball, and then to do some badminton. Really, they will always be looking for people to join. I knew a few captains of various college sports teams. They were always struggling to find final players. So if you're the kind of person who just likes playing sports for the fun of it, there's a huge opportunity here. and definitely something to get involved with as much as you can, provided you've handed in all your essays, that kind of thing.
And there are, I'm sure you'll have encountered them as well, Will, more than a few people who find themselves spending a lot more time in sport or drama or one of these other extracurriculars and letting their academics slack, which I don't recommend doing, but certainly does happen.
Yeah. It's also worth, while we're on the topic of sports, it's worth mentioning that Oxford is home to the largest, I think it's the largest, am I going to say something wrong here? Anyway, so they do croquet cuppers in the summer, which has hundreds and hundreds of teams, and it's got some kind of largest sporting competition in Europe or whatever it is, just because of the huge number of teams that play. And that is something that I would encourage everyone to do, regardless if you're any good, regardless if you spend any time practicing. It's just fun. And the important thing here is you're going to be working hard, so you want to be able to enjoy yourself as well.
Yes, and the great virtue of croquet is even people who are good at it look undignified doing it because of the ridiculous stance that's involved.
That is true, yeah.
So to move away from sport, I wanted to talk briefly about student government. Now, this is something that you will find in every university, but again, we've talked a lot about the collegiate system here. Because the colleges are so much smaller, between 5 and 10% of people in any given college are going to be some kind of part of student government, whether they're in charge of sorting out dinners, whether they're in charge of LGBTQ issues, whether they're helping out the librarian, or whether they're involved in really any other part of student government inside their college. And obviously they can then go on and do that at the university-wide level if they want to. There are loads of opportunities to influence the way the universities and the colleges are run.
Yeah.
And again, because of the collegiate system, there may only be 300 people at your college, and there may be 20 roles that need filling. So the opportunity to do that and to engage in that way is really very much available in a way that a university of thousands of people isn't going to be.
And because you have these colleges, you've sort of got these microclimates all dotted around. And so that there is, as Matt's been saying, much more opportunity to get involved. I mean, at our college, we had a few JCR positions, which people often say, that sounds like a fake position when you say it. Were there any like that at yours, Matt?
I'm trying to think. I think it was probably overkill. When I was at Emmanuel, we had 4 social secretaries,
wow,
which I think was probably too many, and we could have got away with only having 2. But there is also demand to be involved in these things. And my responsibility of being in charge of the food was something I enjoyed immensely. It is very pleasant to be elected to the position of person who has to go and taste the wine.
And you usually get some kind of perks for positions like that, right? Outside of drinking all their wine.
Yeah, all sorts of things. I know that I believe in a lot of colleges, the JCR president has an assigned particularly nice room, things like that. And this is also a really important part of how the collegiate system works, which is that because the college itself it can be quite small, the number of fellows who are actively engaged will also be quite small. And so the level of dialogue and accountability you get between the student government and the government of the college can be of really high quality and much better than you're going to get in a big university, where there might be a much larger administration and a much larger number of students. It means there's a little bit more alienation there.
Yeah. So one of our, well, there were 2 JCR positions people always say it doesn't sound real, and one of them was the tortoise rep. And tortoise rep was in charge of looking after the college tortoise, who would then race in the annual tortoise races held at Corpus Christi. So that was a JCR position. We also had a cake rep. Cake rep was in charge of delivering to every student once a year a cake of their choice. So, again, there's these very serious positions of president, treasurer, returning officer, and slightly less serious positions where you're still getting involved.
Yeah, and this is all part of the unique atmosphere of an Oxford or Cambridge college, that it has these traditions, it has these quirks, and because because of the size, there's able to be such a unique sense of community that isn't plausible at UCL when you've got maybe even 600 people in your course, let alone in your year or in your university. So the last thing I want to talk about is the opportunities for internships. Now, I think, Will, you have a little bit more knowledge about this area than I do, because I was only at Cambridge as a postgrad. And this is very much, as far as I can tell, an undergrad focused thing for people who are looking to go into grad schemes rather than academic.
Yeah, so there are rounds and rounds of careers fairs and things like that to really throw yourself into. I'm pretty sure any given week there's going to be some kind of careers opportunity, networking event, whether that's in your college or university wide. Usually students do these internships over the summer. Some very keen students will even do them over the Easter holidays. So particularly some of the lawyers, economists, they're keen on what's known as spring weeks. And really, you get out of it what you put in. So if you can ignore all these things and not be too bothered about it and really focus on your degree, and that's fine. Or you can use Oxford and Cambridge as a real opportunity to sort of get things lined up once you're on the other side. And you do have naturally a lot of sort of high powered, very fancy firms who are interested in the kind of students who are at Oxford and Cambridge. The university itself also gives a lot of support. So they've got CV support services, they've got internships which they line up themselves as well, outside of the careers fairs, which you would then do directly with the company. So that there's a hell of a lot going on. Usually you're able to get involved as much or as little as you want. Again, you do have some people who focus so much on the networking opportunities that they can sometimes let their degree fall by the side a little bit. Do remember, most of these kind of graduate schemes, internships do require a certain level of degree as a minimum standard, but provided you're getting at least a 2-1 and you're setting yourself up with an internship experience, you're in a really good position, because a lot of the graduate schemes for certain companies end up to be filled up by people who were also on internships with that company the year before or the year before that. So yeah, there is a lot of opportunity. The key thing would be to keep an eye out for when these events are happening and go to as many of them as you can. A lot of people can be quite anxious about it, but ultimately it doesn't really matter if, you know, the first careers fair you go to, you sort of maybe aren't dressed quite right, or you say the wrong thing to someone standing at a stall, because there'll be others and there'll be other people that you can speak to. And actually you're better off getting that first experience where you maybe do something a little bit wrong so that you can then get it right the next time.
Thanks, Will. That I think ties back really well to our theme for next week, when we're talking about preparing in the long run for interviews. You know, there's nothing wrong with giving a bad impression of yourself when you're in first year, when you're not worrying about getting into the job market just yet, but starting that process of improvement early on, so that you can get to the standard you need to be by the time you need to be there, is really valuable. And again, this is why we talk about preparing for interviews, you know, before the application, before the interview invitation, perhaps even before the admissions test. Because if you've done that preparation for a long time, you've really developed yourself, you're going to be ready at the right time, rather than trying to cram all of that into a too short a space of time. So the last thing I wanted to talk about very briefly, before we talk a little bit more about the services UniAdmissions provide, is how these things that we've just talked about affect your application. And so I'm going to hand over briefly to one of our favourite speakers, Philip Knox of Cambridge, who runs the admissions in the English department.
So I suppose if you are extremely interested and excited by things that are not related to the subject of English, like sport or music or something like that, that's great. But we're probably not that interested actually in that element of your well-rounded self.
I appreciate that's a little bit of a trick moment there, sneaking him in after all of the lovely slides and discussion we've had. But the really important thing to emphasize here is this isn't Harvard, where you're gonna Harvard or Yale or Dartmouth, where you're going to be able to leverage your skill as a fencer or a lacrosse player to improve your application. Oxford and Cambridge will be selecting purely on the basis of academic merit. It's great that you've enjoyed being in the school play. It's great that you have done your Duke of Edinburgh. but even if you are heading off to Tokyo in the next couple of weeks, the only thing they're going to care about is whether you've got those top academic grades. You know, you're not getting in with 3 Bs even if you do go to Tokyo. That's just the way it is. All of the things we've been talking about today are fantastic opportunities that you should really embrace once you've got in and once you've started, but they're not going to be a meaningful part of your application, which but begins to bring us on to, and I wanted to sneak this in just for consistency's sake. Our famous pie chart where we talk about the relative weights of the different parts of the application. Will, if you'd like to take it away.
Yeah, so I think the key takeaway point of this session in particular is that for those of you who are really keen on your sport, on your politics, on your drama, on your music, whatever it is, you won't have to sacrifice that by going to Oxford and Cambridge. I speak to lots of students who say, it sounds good, but actually I want to carry on doing my rugby. I want to carry on doing my acting. And so I don't think I can go to Oxford, Cambridge because I won't have that opportunity. That really isn't the case. You aren't going to have to sacrifice that by pursuing your academics as well, but it just isn't going to help you in achieving the place. Now, this pie chart is something we use quite reliably when speaking with students and giving advice on their applications. As you can see here, we've got the largest chunks being the admissions test score and the interview. So the interview in grey, the admissions test score in orange. These are really important parts of the application process. These are going to be predominantly the deciding factors on whether or not a student gets an offer. And what we see relatively consistently is those students scoring in the top 5% of their admissions test, they will get offers. Those scoring in the top 15%, they will get interviews, definitely. And so focusing on these parts of the application is vital. If you spend all your time on your personal statements, which fits into that yellow everything else section, then you're spending your time on the wrong place. Naturally, with an application like this, you need to be as strong and as impressive as you can be across the board. But if a student comes to me and says, I've got an hour, should I spend it on my TSA or spend it on my personal statement? It should always go to the TSA, because that's really where the biggest difference is going to lie in terms of them evaluating you. Now, you'll notice the blue section is the exam grades. Now, this is something that we've seen, over the last year, really, get smaller. Ultimately, whilst exam grades aren't genuine reflections of performance, and I'll explain that a bit better in a minute, but whilst we've been in this period where people aren't actually sitting their exams, the weighting has slipped slightly further away from them. Ultimately, when an Oxford professor is considering 30 applicants for medicine, the only standardized test they have at the moment that they've all sat is the BMAT. They no longer have the GCSEs as a standardized test because no one actually sat them and they've been allocated. Now, allocations are as good as they can be, but they're not actually sitting the exam. Predicted grades are okay, but they're usually about 80% wrong. So again, it's not something that professors can make a huge amount of decisions based on. And actually, GCSEs are seen as a much better indicator of A-level performance than predicted grades necessarily are. Okay, if you're predicted 3 Cs for A-level, that's probably going to raise a few eyebrows and probably cast out your application. But it's still not going to be the largest deciding factor when weighing you up against similar candidates. It's worth saying that this is a rule of thumb. It does vary slightly from subject to subject. So the slightly more STEM-based subjects are going to care less about your personal statement. The slightly more humanities-based subjects will likely care a little bit more. And it's worth noting as well that the yellow section comprises of personal statement, teachers' references, any other sort of intangible thing that you've been doing which could put some kind of benefit to your application. And the other key difference is things are slightly different from Oxford to Cambridge. So many of you will know, because we say this quite a lot, Cambridge interview a lot of their applicants. So if you are a student who has slightly lower GCSEs than average for your subject, isn't super confident about doing well in the admissions test, then actually you've got a much higher chance of getting to at least the interview stage at Cambridge, where hopefully you can turn things around for you and your application. Whereas because Oxford shortlists so strictly pre-interview, there's a lot more people that get cut out. And they are shortlisting pretty much exclusively based on admissions test score and GCSEs. So if you know your GCSEs are going to be letting you down, but you can make up for it elsewhere, maybe Cambridge is the right place to go. If you know that actually your GCSEs are very strong and you are doing all the right preparation for your test, then actually Oxford might be the right place to go to. As with anything, in order to do well in this, you need to know how you're being measured. And so having a good sense of this pie chart is going to be important when thinking about your application.
Thanks, Will. The only thing I wanted to add there was Will mentioned a hypothetical student who's been predicted 3 Cs but is determined to go to Oxford or Cambridge. This is a really good opportunity to apply after you've done your A-levels, because if you've been predicted your 3 Cs and then you've gone and got those 3 A stars, if you are applying with the grades already in hand, you don't have to worry about predicted grades because there's nothing to predict.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a greater weight placed on things that you have achieved rather than things that you've been predicted, and the things that are newer rather than older. You know, they're not going to look at the SAT scores you got when you were 11 years old, because probably they're not going to be relevant to what you do when you're 18 or 19 years old.
Yeah.
You know, just as you mature in the job market, things start falling off your CV. You know, at a certain point in time, people stop caring what your GCSEs are. People stop caring what your A-levels are. And similarly, if you've done brilliantly in your A-levels, they're not going to care as much about your GCSEs. If you've done brilliantly in the admissions test, they can look at your GCSEs and go, oh, he's improved a lot, hasn't he? It's all about making sure not only that you give the best impression of yourself, but also that there is proof of your improvement. And if there's any doubt, what you're doing is you're showing that what you did in the past isn't an accurate reflection of what you can do now, which is why the admissions tests are such a big deal, because you know that's the test you're doing in October for an interview in November, rather than the test you're doing in 2018 for an interview in 2021.
It's worth saying, you know, lots of students that I've spoken to hadn't really switched themselves on, hadn't really quite connected with their subjects at GCSE, but when it got to A level, that's when things clicked into place. And now, if your GCSEs weren't so strong, then your school's less likely to be keen to predict you strong A levels, particularly if you've moved school. And so that can be quite frustrating. But like Matt said, in that scenario, you go to those A levels, you way overachieve on your predicted grades, and then you make an application which is much, much stronger.
Exactly. If you've got 3 A's, you're in a much better position than someone who's predicted 3 A's, because there's no doubt in anyone's mind as to whether you're going to get them or not, because you already have. So having sort of switched the focus over to how you get in from what you do once you get there, Will, who can help you get into Oxford or Cambridge?
Yeah, so we're coming on to the section where I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at UniAdmissions. Naturally, lots of different people will approach it in a different way. And we put together our programs based on what we've seen makes a difference, what helps students. And naturally, if we weren't getting students into Oxford or Cambridge, we'd change things up. But actually, you know, we've been doing relatively well. Our programs are made up of a few different parts. And again, anyone who's spoken with us and we've recommended a program to will know this. But the 4 key parts are tutorials, materials and resources, enrichment seminars, and then our intensive courses. So I'll talk about them briefly, just one by one, so that you can all have a bit of a sense as to what we do. And if this is something which you think, actually, this sounds like the kind of thing which could really help me, then the next step would be to have a chat with one of us. We don't accept everyone onto these programs. We do have to have a selection consultation process first. In terms of the tutorials, what we do when a new student enrolls with us would be selecting a tutor who studied their subject at their university. So if you're a budding medic who wants to study at Oxford, we'd pair you with a tutor who studied medicine at Oxford. And really the point of that support is to be as bespoke to the individual as possible. There are going to be parts of the application which you struggle with more than others, and naturally we want to focus that time and focus the tutor's expertise on those areas that need it the most. And then of course you can then be doing other stuff outside of that time to make sure that the other areas are ticking along as well as possible. But the tutors will really be there to help you across the board. So personal statements, BMAT, UCAT as well, because you'll be applying to other medical schools, interviews. These are some of the key hurdles, and that's where the tutor is going to be making the biggest difference. Outside of these tutorials, you're going to be set homework, and that's where the second part of our program comes in, the materials and the resources. So if you could.
Sorry, I was a little slow on the slide there. There was something I wanted to add here on the discussion of the one-to-one tutorials, which is that support and reinforce the learning, we make sure that you get an in-depth report after each tutorial. This serves two purposes. The first is to make sure that the student doesn't forget what they've done, what the next steps are, and has a really accurate sense of how they're progressing. And the second is also to make sure parents, I don't know if we have any parents on the call, but I'm sure if we do, they will have experienced perhaps occasionally suboptimal communication with their teenager. This is to make sure that all of the information is accurately conveyed from tutor to parent as well as from tutor to student, so that parents know what there is they can do to support what's being done, and ultimately understand the value of the program as well as the student does. As our experience is that young people are always the best at communicating with their parents about things like this. So we like to solve that particular problem by making sure that report goes to both parent and student. But speaking of things that are written down at great length and in great detail, Will, you were about to tell us about the resources.
Yeah, so, and actually, you can sort of see in those reports where you'd have instructions for homework and things to be getting on with in between that tutorial and the next. What's really important is that our students are able to work independently, they are self-driven, and that once they come out of a tutorial, they carry on improving themselves as a candidate. They don't just sort of stagnate until the next one. We're very keen not to spoon feed students, and again, that's something that we'll talk about on a consultation, but that you really need to be the driving force. What we want to do is make sure that you have all the tools you need to drive your application as successfully as possible. So we've got lots of textbooks, we've got lots of resources and materials, we've got video lectures, there's a lot of stuff for budding students to get their teeth sunk into. And we typically have a bit of a demonstration of how our prep portal works. Is that on the next slide, Matt?
Yes, that's coming up. Give me a moment. So yeah, it's not just that we put these things across in the form of books, printed out and written down. They can also be accessed digitally. And we now have a little video of the prep portal. Very quick, so I'm not going to put too much pressure on Will to narrate it, but you'll be able to see what it does as it plays through. Yeah,
and I think, this isn't a comprehensive demonstration, but it's just to give you a bit of a sense of the kind of things that our students are doing. As with anything, you need to be learning what you're doing first, then you need to be practicing it, and then you need to be iteratively improving on the areas that you struggle with. And you can do a lot of that on your own, but you will also, the areas where you do become unstuck, that's time to spend with your tutor. I'll often say to students, having a tutor isn't a substitute for practice. You are still going to have to do a lot of practice to make sure you're getting everything right. And having these banks of questions means that our students can do that effectively. And it also means that they can keep track of everything. I remember when I was revising for my maths and further maths A-levels, I had to keep these big bundles of my past papers with the marks to sort of keep track of if I was improving or not. Whereas here you've got that all recorded. You can see if you're improving, you can see where you're getting worse or where you're getting better, and then you can know where to be spending your time. Ultimately, Oxbridge and applicants are busy. You've probably got lots of things going on. What we want to do is make sure that you're using your time in the best way possible so that you improve as much as possible, you're a strong candidate, and you get an offer. So the third part, that's the end of the demonstration, as brief as it was. The third part of our programs is our enrichment seminars. So these I see as sort of really, really important. Once a week, what we'll do on a Sunday afternoon is there will be a range of different subject-specific classes going on. So we have 5 streams. one for STEM, one for humanities, one for medicine, one for economics, and one for law. And so all of our different students from different subject streams will be going to these classes, and they will be covering different topics specific to their subject, and it's aimed at sort of the first year university level. So this is really geared up to help students springboard themselves into their subject at a level higher than they're used to at school, and also be discussing it. So these are very interactive. Students will be asking questions, there will be discussions. It's important to start engaging with the material in a meaningful way, rather than just sort of passively absorbing information. The point of these seminars isn't for our students to just be sort of walking encyclopedias. The point of it is for them to have the opportunity to engage with a huge range of subjects which they otherwise wouldn't. Each seminar comes with a handout, so there's pre-reading if it's a topic you're not too familiar with, and further reading if it's a topic you really enjoyed. And what's quite important is to be selective in terms of what you're spending your time on. We don't want students reading about topics that they hate. We want them reading about things that fascinate them, because actually that's the kind of thing you want to be talking about when it comes to an interview. And then our final part of the program that we do, students work on with their tutorials, they work through the materials, they go to the seminars each week, and they're doing that consistently through the year. The final part is our intensive courses. Now we run one per part of the application. So I used an example of a medic earlier. Let's use an example of a Cambridge engineer. As a Cambridge engineer, you have to submit your personal statement and your SAQ, you have to sit your NGAR, and you have to sit interviews. So a few weeks before the interview, there'll be an intensive course. A few weeks before the test, there'll be an intensive course. And usually around September, there's courses for the personal statement and the SAQ. The point of these courses isn't necessarily to cover anything new, but it's really to consolidate all the work that you've been doing through the year. You know, from if you're starting now, you're working consistently, that's a lot of stuff that you're learning. Really important to wrap that all up. And basically make sure that you can walk into the test, you can walk into the interviews, you can submit your application, knowing that you've done everything you need to do and that you're confident. It's really important to have that sort of checkpoint just to make sure that you're happy with everything. And if there is anything which isn't quite right, let's say you're at the NGAR course and you think, actually, there's some things here which I hadn't looked at for a little while because we've been focusing on certain areas with my tutor. I need a little bit of refreshing before I'm completely happy across the board. You then got a few weeks to do that, and you can do that with your tutor, you can do that with the materials. And that's pretty much the scope of the things that we do with our students. Like I said, we like to put together programs specific to an individual, but we like to have these different parts because they all serve a different purpose. And it's all very relevant in terms of helping you become a really strong candidate. And again, the skills that you're developing here are obviously very relevant to the Oxford-Cambridge application process, but ultimately it's all about making you a stronger academic. And those are the kind of things which actually will help you whilst you're at university and beyond.
Thanks. Yeah. I hope that this has all sounded very, very appealing. The good news is that it also has been shown to work. In the last cycle for which we have complete data, in the order of 36% of the students who worked with us were lucky enough to receive offers, or should I say skilled and impressive enough, compared to less than 20% of those students who applied without our support.
Matt, you said 36 rather than 63.
Did I? I'm sorry, 63. 36 would still be impressive, but our number is much better than that. I'm sorry. Thank goodness there's a graphic.
There's a graphic, yeah. Well, where would we be without the slideshow? Well,
indeed. And those numbers compare really flatteringly with even the top schools in the country. I appreciate these are perhaps a little small depending on your screen, but our acceptance rate is comfortably ahead of even the likes of Eton and Westminster, St Paul's and other very famous schools. Our fees are also substantially lower, although we don't have as good playing fields, so you know it goes both ways. The last thing I wanted to talk about very briefly, actually two things. The first was to say that if you've enjoyed this webinar and you would like to let us know, please give us a review on Trustpilot. other people have done. We appreciate every one of these reviews. The positive ones we enjoy, the negative ones we learn from. So please do let us know through that platform what you think. Particularly mention myself or Will, because we always enjoy the flattery. And the penultimate thing to say is that all of our programs include a 2-week free trial, 2-week trial, sorry, which means that if you come on board with one of our programs and you find that it's not a good match for you within the first couple of weeks, then we will let you go without any hard feelings. The way in which we work with students can be quite intensive, it can be quite demanding. It's what we have found works, but we appreciate it doesn't work for everyone. And so in those rare instances that there isn't a good match, we make sure that within that 2-week period that you're not going to be left off worse as a result. Well, can you talk a little bit more about this, because you have much more experience in working with our students than I do? Yeah,
so ultimately I do my best in terms of evaluating students, evaluating how much they would commit to engage with the program and how much they benefit from it and whether or not it's right for them. And I like to think I do a pretty good job of it, but I'm not perfect. And occasionally there are times where actually the student starts and it isn't quite right. Ultimately, we don't want students in programs that aren't working for them. We don't want students in programs that are sort of bringing them down, pulling them back. And that's why we have this, what we call cooling off period. So yeah, you have 2 weeks, you can have up to 2 tutorials, you can go to some of the seminars, you can start going through the materials. If there's a problem, obviously we'll speak with you, see if it's something we can fix, but if it's not, like Matt said, we can withdraw you, we refund completely. The main thing is if we've sent you books, we just ask that you send them back to us, and yeah, then we leave things there.
Thanks, Will. We aspire to be for everyone, and to be a great match with all of the students we work with, but we appreciate that that's not going to work every time, and so this is about being realistic as well as being generous and considerate on that front. Speaking of generosity, the other thing to say is, if you have enjoyed this presentation, if you think you would like to work with us, but you are worried about cost, the good news is that we are also worried about cost. It is highly likely that if you don't feel as though you will be able to easily afford our services, that we are also going to be able to subsidize them for you. In 2020, we worked with very nearly 100 students on a reduced fee or a no fee basis. And we have a target of working with 250 students on that basis this year. And are hoping that next year, for every student who comes to us through the conventional routes, we'll also be working with another student on a subsidized basis. How are we doing on that 250 target, Will, out of curiosity? It's not something I've looked into recently.
No, so I was sort of recommending a couple of students apply for this over the last 2 days. I think we've got plenty of space for students, and we're just missing people who are applying. So, if this is something which you think you would be right for, or if it's something that someone who might benefit from this, please do send them our way. There's a sort of a written application where you write a small personal statement. We also ask for a reference letter from a teacher. And if you're able to submit all that, then we'll be able to turn things around and get you the support that I've been talking about so far. Those 93 students last year, our target was 100. So we had spaces for more students, but we didn't have enough applicants really. So, it's a shame to let these things go to waste. And we're very keen to fill those spaces.
Fab. Thanks very much, Will. That brings us to the end of the slides. So we're now going to take a little bit of Q&A before I disappear to watch Wales versus Denmark at 5 o'clock. Probably on balance, not 2 hours and 5 minutes of Q&A.
Yeah, I'd be surprised.
We'll certainly take a few questions. If you drop those into the question and answer section, then we will work through those. And if we are permitted to reciprocate, I will also put out a couple of polls as well, so as we can learn a little bit more about the sorts of things that you're interested in, so that we can continue to improve the quality of what we put across. As if it turns out every single person here is applying for, I don't know, archaeology and anthropology at Oxford, then probably we'll do a special presentation on that. But if
Yeah, we can tailor.
If none of you are, probably we won't. It's all a case of responding to the audience as best and as most effectively as we can.
Yeah. And if you guys have suggestions for further topics that we can do, we've got a relatively fleshed out roster for these open days to run through the rest of this year. But if there are topics that we've missed, we haven't thought of, we've overlooked, then please do make suggestions and we'll try and fit it in. Because ultimately this is an opportunity for us to just get information out there, which you guys are wanting.
Absolutely. I remember that last year we spent a very long and very graph-packed presentation talking about the outcomes of the BMAT, which was not originally on the schedule, but was something that we had such popular demand for. It ended up being a really high engagement, really interesting thing to talk about. And the last thing which I've forgotten to draw attention to is, if you are keen to work with us, please book yourself in for a consultation. There should be an animation playing now, which shows you how to go about doing it, which is to say that you visit our website, uniadmissions.co.uk, book a consultation, fill in your details, and we will get in touch with you. And the famous question about this we got last week that I'd forgotten about. Will, can you remember how the time zones work?
In terms of if they book a consultation, which time zone will it be in?
Yes.
Yeah, so it should say on the thing that it will be UK time. Okay. So ideally, if you're over in the States, book it in, what would that be? Book it in the afternoon/evening. Otherwise, you're going to get a call whilst you're asleep. Equally, if you're on the other side of the world over in Asia, book one for the morning, and we'll catch you in the evening. So it will be sort of booked at the time slot in the UK.
Fab. We're still waiting on any further questions, so please do get those in now. Otherwise, Will and I will disappear, and you'll have no chance to find anything out from us until next week. Here we are.
So there is one question about how much do predicted grades matter?
Oh, yes.
And so I guess we did touch on this a little bit. I think this one came in as we, through the presentation. Ultimately, they are somewhat important, but they are not as relevant as they're not as influential as a lot of people think they are. If they severely misalign with everything else, then they can also be sort of disregarded as well. So if your GCSEs are pretty poor and your admissions test is pretty poor, then even if your predicted grades are super high, it's not going to counterbalance the sort of prominent story that you might not be the right kind of candidate based on the other information that they have. Equally, if your GCSEs are really high and your admissions tests are really strong, but your predicted grades are a little low, the admissions tutors are probably still going to be interested in spending time with you and at least getting you to interview to see what's going on there, because it might be something which is sort of, it can be explained away and actually you are a very strong candidate. It's worth also saying that if your predicted grades are slightly below the minimum entry requirements, that also doesn't mean you won't necessarily get to an interview. Again, if you're scoring in the top 5% of your test, they are going to want to interview you to find out what's going on. Now, your offer will probably be conditional on you getting the minimum entry requirements or higher, but you can still go about it, or you could not apply and then try again the following year if you're planning on superseding what you'd achieved. Yeah,
that's a good point, Will. So I was going to speak briefly about teacher references. So teacher references, it's all about making sure that the teacher communicates well the potential growth of the student. The universities take teacher references very seriously. They get more weight than the personal statement, in fact, which most people don't realise.
Yep.
But it's all about highlighting potential. If the teacher sincerely believes that you have the potential to go far beyond the A-level curriculum, that's the thing that they're interested in, because you might be brilliant at A-level, but then really have hit your ceiling there. That teacher reference really needs to show that you're, bursting through that A-level ceiling and ready to achieve really spectacular results at degree level. that's what I would be trying to emphasize in the teacher reference.
It's worth saying for teacher reference as well, you're probably better off having it. So some schools will just have all the references written by like the head teacher because they think that seniority is what matters most. But actually, you're probably better off having it with the teacher that knows the student the best, because they're the ones who are going to be able to give the best account and you know, demonstrate the potential much better than the head teacher who's likely not spent much time with the student. Now, schools often do things the way they do things, and so actually the reference is something which a student, or even us when we're supporting students, often has slightly less influence over. But you know, if you have that option, then I would definitely rather it be a teacher that has worked, you know, supported your son, daughter for a long time and knows them really, really well. I mean, we can see, so they've also asked about doing a talk about teacher references. We can see if that would manage us a whole seminar, but it is a smaller side of things. And similarly to the personal statement, you should spend very little time talking about non-academic extracurriculars. In the Oxford does publish guidelines actually for the personal statement and the teacher reference, and in both of them they say please leave that to as much of a minimum as you can effectively.
Yeah. So the last two questions I wanted to tackle, I'm going to leave these both to you, Will. Had questions about the ECAR and TSA.
Yep.
So if you can tell us a little bit about how to best prepare for the admissions tests.
Sure.
And finally, to answer Yassine's question about students who are applying to start not in September of this year, not in September of next year, but in September of 2023.
So let's start with the ECAA and the TSA. Naturally, so for both of these tests are really, really important. It's the first thing to say. So definitely spending time practicing is really crucial. What I would do is, well, firstly, I mean, what we design our programs informed by what we think is the best way to prepare. So you should definitely be assessing your strengths and weaknesses across the test. So sitting past papers or practice papers is a really good starting point. Working out where things are going wrong. So to use the TSA as an example, section 1 is often split into critical thinking and problem solving. You might identify that your critical thinking is slightly weaker or your problem solving is slightly weaker, and then focus on that particular area. There's a huge tendency amongst people to do stuff that they're good at. My piano teacher noticed this and was very continually frustrated by the fact that I would really only practice the bits of the music that I already knew how to play, because it was much more satisfying to do that. But that's a huge pitfall to fall into. And the reason why I'm not a concert pianist now is because I never focused on the stuff that actually needed to be focused on. Part of the benefit of having a tutor is they can see where you're making mistakes and where you need to focus on. They can sort of calibrate you towards that. And when you reach a wall in terms of how much you can improve yourself, they can help pull you up. They also have written components. So I would focus on, I would try starting writing those kind of essays quite early on and just do that regularly, regular practice on that front. The TSA essay is a short essay. So that's what I sat. And it's a really short essay, 30 minutes. That is not much time. So it's quite different to the other kind of essays that you might be doing for school. So getting used to that is going to be quite important. Now, in terms of when do applications for Unimissions start for an applicant hoping to start in 2023? So you would submit your application next year, so October 2022. In terms of, if you're talking about when would a student speak with us about starting their support, depends a bit on the individual, because we actually do support students from as early as year 10. But the student needs to be on board. It needs to be the right kind of student, someone who's quite committed and quite motivated and very interested in their subject. Now, what we do with students who start younger is usually in that sort of, they'll be finishing their year 11 if they're thinking of applying to starting in 2023. It's usually a matter of building up broad academic skills and capabilities and interest in their subject to then apply that in the next year apply that to the different parts of the application in the main program. And again, the specifics of that is something that we'd talk about in a one-to-one consultation. Like I say, if you think your son, daughter is ready to start putting some time aside to this, then we can have a conversation about what might work. If they aren't, then it might be that this is a conversation to have sort of, a little bit further down the line.
Fab. Thanks, Will. The only question I wanted to finally tackle just very quickly from Emily, who asks if it is just one teacher reference that goes in your application. Yes, it is just the one reference. The reference is, in fact, I believe the exact same length as the personal statement. But it's not uncommon for teachers to do a kind of composite reference. So they will ask the opinion of a couple of their colleagues and then combine it all into one reference. That's a really usual approach to it. And so if you have two teachers who you're struggling to choose between to be your referee, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with seeing if you can get them to collaborate. Unless, of course, they're enemies, in which case that might be more difficult. But I'm sure you have the charm and skills to manage that unlikely scenario. So that brings us to the end of what we've got time for today. It's been lovely to speak to all of you. And Lucia has a question about English language testing. The very best place to look for this is on the website of the university in question, as they will have all of the up-to-date information on their own requirements there. So that's where I would check. The Oxford website is particularly good about international qualifications, so that's where I would start, as they have really, really thorough information on there.
Broadly speaking, for language tests, just prior to the application deadline is your safest bet. So any time between now and October, really. If you do it too early, so if you sit it when you're 11, then it will need to be resat. I think they usually stand for about 2 years, and then they need a new one to be sat. So yeah, any time in that year, sort of prior to your application, is fine.
But there we go. Thank you all for joining us. We will see you next week to talk about interviews. So say goodbye, Will.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for coming along.
And it's goodbye from me as well. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.